Let me tell you a scary story. There's something in the attic. In a small, quiet town, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, there stood an old, creaky house. The house had been abandoned for decades, its windows dark and the air around it always a little too cold. People said it was haunted, but no one could agree on the source of the haunting. Some whispered about strange noises coming from the attic, while others claimed they had seen shadows moving behind the cracked, dusty windows. It wasn't until the Johnson family moved in that the truth began to surface. The Johnsons were a typical family of four. There was Mark, the father, who was a skeptic when it came to anything supernatural, and his wife Sarah, who loved the charm of the old house despite its eerie reputation. Their two children, Emily and Jake, were curious but mostly excited about having a new home to explore. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. The family busied themselves with unpacking and getting settled, and though the house creaked and groaned as old houses often do, they thought nothing of it. Then, late one night, Emily heard a noise. She sat up in bed, straining to listen. And there it was again, a soft thumping, like footsteps, but too slow to be anyone walking. It was coming from above her, from the attic. The next day, she told her parents, but they brushed it off, telling her it was just the house settling. Yet, the noise continued. Every night it grew louder, accompanied by what sounded like muffled scraping, like someone dragging something heavy across the attic floor. Emily could barely sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. One evening, while the family was gathered for dinner, they all heard it, clear as day. A soft, rhythmic tapping, followed by what sounded like faint laughter. It came from the attic. Everyone froze. "Maybe an animal got in," Mark said, trying to maintain his usual calm. But the look in his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. That night, Mark and Sarah decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights, they crept up the narrow stairs that led to the attic. The door at the top was stiff, but Mark managed to shove it open. The attic was exactly what one might expect: dusty, filled with old, forgotten furniture and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. But something was wrong. In the center of the attic stood a figure, unmoving. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, dressed in black and white with a painted face that was eerily pale in the glow of their flashlights. His eyes were wide and expressionless, his mouth curled into a disturbing smile. It was a mime. Mark stepped forward cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's a mannequin," he muttered, more to reassure himself than anyone else. But as he reached out to touch it, the figure shifted ever so slightly, its head tilting to one side. The attic door slammed shut behind them. Sarah screamed as the mime's painted lips twitched, and suddenly he began to move. Silently, smoothly, as though performing some invisible routine. His hands mimed pulling an unseen rope, then pushing against an imaginary wall, his eyes never leaving theirs. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The mime continued his silent performance, growing more frantic with each gesture, his movements sharp and violent now. He mimed being trapped, beating against the invisible walls that seemed to close in on him, his smile twisting into something grotesque. They could hear Emily and Jake pounding on the other side of the door, their voices muffled by the thick wood. But inside, the mime's performance had reached a fevered pitch. He was no longer miming. He was pounding on the walls, clawing at the air as though trying to escape some unseen force. Mark and Sarah backed into a corner, their eyes wide with terror. The mime turned to them, his face inches from theirs, though no sound came from his throat. His breath, icy cold, brushed their skin. Then, as quickly as it had started, the mime stopped. He straightened up, his eyes once again blank and hollow. With one final exaggerated bow, he faded into the shadows, leaving Mark and Sarah trembling in the dark. The door to the attic swung open. The family never spoke of what happened that night. They left the house the next day, abandoning their belongings and their home without a second thought. The house stands empty again, but if you listen closely on quiet nights, you can still hear the soft, rhythmic tapping from the attic. The mime is waiting,